Hey guys, it's Danny. Today I have yet another myth or truth for you guys. I have tons more suggestions that you guys left on the initial post. So we're gonna take a look at a few more today and hopefully debunk some of the ideas you were wondering about. Today's video is sponsored by Skillshare. Find out how you can get 1 month completely free later on in the video. Alright, so the first myth we're gonna start with, it's a really good one. It also has 15 likes. Good job, Kyla. So Kyla is saying, I heard that densely packed sphagnum moss will actually dry faster than fluffy, loosely packed sphagnum moss. I've wondered about that ever since I heard it. Well, that is truth. Slightly counterintuitive, right? Well, let me explain. Sphagnum moss works exactly like a sponge. It holds onto water in between the tiny air pockets created by the fibers. When the moss is fluffy and loose like this, those air pockets are at their maximum dimension or their maximum size. So they will retain the maximum quantity of water they can. Whereas when we press on the sphagnum moss fiber, we are downsizing and even eliminating these air pockets. Hence, the strand that is compressed cannot retain as much water as when it's fluffy, simply due to those air pockets being eliminated. And of course, the more we compact it, the more we eliminate all of those air pockets, the more there's nothing to hold on to that water. And at this point, some of you might wonder why I keep telling you to always arrange sphagnum moss inside orchid pots as fluffy and loose as possible. Won't this actually make the pot retain more water? Not really. Number one, yes, I do want the strands of sphagnum moss that you will use in your mixture to work at their full potential, let's say. But second, it's about root suffocation. See, those air pockets make sure that the roots have air to breathe as well. Not only do they retain water, but also they allow oxygen in those air pockets as well, particularly when everything dries out. Root rot happens not because of water. Water may help in some instances, but most of the times issues with roots come from the lack of oxygen around the roots. And the more we compact sphagnum moss, the more the air has issues reaching the roots. And on top of it all, if we just pour water and eliminate completely the very few tiny air pockets we still have left, even with packed sphagnum moss, then you can see how that will lead to root rot. That is slightly besides the point, but I wanted to address it because I'm sure some of you would wonder. Always keep your sphagnum moss as loose as possible, even if it will retain more water than super packed sphagnum moss. Water doesn't kill roots, it's the lack of oxygen that does. Roots can actually stay wet pretty much all of the time. If they have enough air pockets in between, they should be just fine. Next up, again, this is a very good one. Victoria is saying, should orchids be replanted after being brought from the store? I heard that there is a sponge inside of the pot that could be the reason for bacterial infections. Is this true or is it a myth? And well, it's a myth. Now, part of that statement is actually true, and I do believe this is the Phalaenopsis we recently repotted. I'll link you to the video down below. Yes, sometimes some orchids do have a plug inside the pot, and that plug is a seedling setup. At some point, any orchid you purchase was a tiny baby, a tiny seedling. And it was potted into a tiny little pot with a medium, be it sphagnum moss, cocoa peat, or other materials. Now, when nurseries repot orchids, when they grow a little bit larger and they cannot fit in that tiny little pot, what they do is unpot the orchid and pot it directly together with the plug inside a bigger pot. So it is not uncommon to find a basket in the middle or a core of a different material. However, that is not necessarily the root of all problems. Sometimes it can be, of course, but sometimes even the entire potting medium can be bad and needs changing. So we cannot really generalize that all plugs will determine all sorts of issues in your pot. Depending on the material, some materials are actually very long lasting, such as the cocoa peat plugs. Even good quality sphagnum moss can be very long lasting. If the plug in the middle is inorganic, then you have no issue. So it really depends on what materials that plug is made out of. For that reason, because we simply cannot generalize, I'm gonna call this a myth. When you do repot your orchid, it is a good idea to remove altogether that plug because it will probably be old, it will not be the same materials you're using, but to attribute all of the problems of your orchid to that plug, it's a little unfair. New orchids should definitely be repotted at some point into a medium that works better for you and that is fresh, and what makes repotting necessary may or may not be the plug. It might actually be the entire potting medium your orchid is in, or even pests. Now, one thing I can assure you is not a myth is today's sponsor, Skillshare. Most of you probably already know that Skillshare is an online learning community with thousands of creative and inspiring classes for people who love to learn every day. This is the place where you can explore, expand on, or learn new things like drawing, painting, design, photography, and much more. In the past months of using Skillshare myself, I managed to learn quite a great deal about painting, which has always been something I struggled with, about the process of actually creating videos, about finding my own style and actually being able to take it out of my mind and into the real world, and much, much more. There are so many courses on so many different subjects. I really just want to have more hours in a day to be able to view them all. Many of the times it happens that I get inspired by things that I thought would never interest me, but now they do. All the classes are premium, have no ads, and new content is added all the time. If you'd like to try Skillshare, visit the link below and the first 1,000 of you will get a completely free 1-month trial to the premium membership. So check it out at the link down below. I hope you'll enjoy it. And in the end, thank you all for supporting the people who support my channel. Next up, Adriana says, myth, anthocyanin, the purple pigment, on orchid leaves means they are getting way too much sun. I definitely think this is a myth. And well, Adriana, you're right, this is definitely a myth. First of all, purely by semantics, because anthocyanin production is not only triggered by the sun. Example, I have 2 orchids here that I grow under my artificial lights, and they do have quite a lot of purple pigment, which has not been triggered by the sun at all. So if you want to take it word by word, definitely a myth. Strong artificial light can determine anthocyanin production as well. However, let's refer to the broader meaning of that sentence. Does the appearance of the red pigment on the leaves mean you are providing too much light? Guess what? That is a myth as well. And while it is true that anthocyanin can be produced in the context of high light intensity, since it does protect the leaf, it's kind of like a tan, if you will, some orchids just adapted to grow like this. For example, Cattleya orchids and even Vanda orchids, they come from areas with a lot of sun exposure or bright light. So it is normal for them to constantly produce anthocyanin to protect themselves. Lowering the amount of light will definitely lower the amount of red on the leaves, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the orchid will photosynthesize correctly and will thrive. In many cases, and again particularly with higher light plants, it is necessary to provide high intensity light, whether it's natural or artificial, like in the case of grow lights. The anthocyanin production is just a genetic trait, and in some cases it can signify that you are actually providing adequate lighting. Now, of course, if you want to take it to the extreme anthocyanin production and even spots of tiny sunburns, well, definitely that is too much light. But you have to take the entire context. What orchid are you working with? How much anthocyanin is too much for that particular orchid? How much light are you actually providing? And is it necessary for that particular orchid? Definitely when you see sunburn, that is too much. And typically sunburn happens in the sun, not necessarily under lights, because it only happens when the leaf gets overheated. Under lights, it can get overheated if it's very close to the light, but typically if you maintain a proper distance, even if your artificial light is pretty bright, it's not enough to burn, literally burn the leaf. Whereas with the sun can definitely heat up the leaves. So that's your cue to step down a little bit from the intensity of the light. Now here's another good one from Dreamcatcher. Orchid roots need to dry up, become silvery, before you water them again. I'm not sure if it's a myth or not. Well, rest assured, it is a myth. However, don't get too excited about it, because it is actually beneficial in cultivation for some orchids to just let them dry out. Many orchids, such as Phalaenopsis, Vandas, Dendrobiums, Cattleyas, they are very drought tolerant. They're epiphytes, they have been adapted to withstand dry conditions, hence they will not be harmed if the medium dries out. That's rule number one, never harm an orchid with your care. Is it necessary though to leave the roots dry? Not really. As I was saying earlier, roots can actually be pretty damp almost at all times. If you give them enough ventilation, they should be just fine. And I'm sure you have seen, and I actually have a video, we have seen Vandas coming from nurseries which have all manner of algae on their roots, on the stem, everywhere. This is because nurseries actually keep those Vandas and other orchids in very high moisture conditions. It's so moist that actually algae grows. Can you imagine? Anyway, so roots like water, but they like air at the same time. In cultivation, this whole idea of oxygenation and aeration of the roots, it's a little bit trickier. We don't have fans running all the time. You don't know how everybody arranges their potting mix, or if the potting mix is of good quality. Is it fluffy sphagnum moss, or is it bad quality moss that is not fluffy and just compacts very fast? Is it big bark, small bark? How big are the air pockets? There are so many variables that depend on each person that generalizing something is not a good idea, but it's inevitable. So we pick the safer generalization that we can. And letting a potting mix dry out makes sure that those air pockets become dry of water and pull in oxygen for the roots, which is very beneficial. Also, in the case of organic medium, the drier it is, the slower it breaks down as well. Water is the vector, if you will, of natural breakdown. All the processes happen much faster in damp conditions than they do in dry conditions. So it is in the best interest of home growers to actually let the potting mix dry out, to eliminate all of the water from the air pockets and oxygenate the roots, and also to make their potting medium, if it's organic, last longer. The orchid is happy because it has oxygen and fresh medium for longer, and the grower is happy because he doesn't need to water every single day. It's a win-win situation for everybody. But is it actually necessary? Naturally speaking, orchids don't really mind. They just want oxygen. So it's more of a cultivation idea, and it's definitely useful to let your potting mix dry out if the orchid can handle it, but not letting the potting medium dry out is also okay if you know what you're doing. And the last truth or myth we're gonna look at today, another super good one, comes from Love of Pets. P.S. Love of Pets actually has a YouTube channel and I've been watching for a lot of time. I'll leave her channel down below. I am beyond surprised that a YouTuber I watched actually watches my videos. So thank you for watching. I really like your videos. Keep doing what you do. All right, so let's get to the myth. Do mini orchids grow into big orchids or they stay miniature size? So let's say miniature orchids will grow into big orchids. That is a myth. But there's a catch. There's always a catch, isn't it? Miniature orchids do actually exist. There are species of orchids which are very tiny, such as the Parishi, and a few others that I don't remember. There are a few miniature species. And those species hybridized with other species gave birth to some pretty tiny orchids, which you can find available for sale at flower shops as well. The problem is, just like with the bigger Phalaenopsis orchids, these orchids are being sold when they first bloom. And Phalaenopsis typically bloom at very young ages in comparison to other orchids. So their full size is not yet developed. They can actually double in size throughout their life. And this happens to miniature Phalaenopsis as well. You can buy a mini phal that is really tiny, and in 1 year it can grow to this size, which this is what happened to this one. This is the Big Lip Sogo Vivian. I think it's a Sogo Vivian, I don't know. I didn't have a tag, but it's the one with the big lip. Beautiful orchid. It was a little tinier when I received it, but now it's a little bit bigger. The thing is, they will not grow as big as the big Phalaenopsis can grow, which I don't necessarily have one to show you. Oh, hold on, I do. Okay, this is more of a medium size. It's not the biggest, but you can see there's definitely a size difference. So mini Phalaenopsis will grow just a little bit bigger until they reach their full potential, but they will not become super huge like these guys, unless what you received is a keiki. But the thing is, flower shops don't really sell keikis. They sell either seedlings, either orchids coming from Mary cloning, which is meristem cloning. I know somebody asked, and I don't know if I answered that comment. So because of this change in size, people have the impression that miniature Phalaenopsis are actually just normal Phalaenopsis at a very young age, which is not really true. They're definitely real, they're definitely smaller, but they can definitely grow quite a little bit more than the initial size. They can actually double in size. But sad news is, so do big Phalaenopsis. Some Phalaenopsis can be huge at some point. These guys will not grow like that, so rest assured, they're probably not gonna take over the entirety of the shelf. And that is about it for today. Thank you guys so much for watching. Hope you've enjoyed today's myth or truth. If you do have myths of your own that you'd like me to debunk, leave them down below in a comment and maybe I will in a future video. So again, thank you so much for watching. Thank you Skillshare for sponsoring yet another video. Subscribe to my channel for more orchid videos, tutorials, experiments, updates, and other fun orchid subjects. If you wish to support the channel, do consider becoming a member or visit the merch store linked down below in the description. You can also follow me on Instagram and Facebook. It's always nice to stay in touch there as well. And with that said, I'll see you all next time. Bye!